Throughout history, the United States has produced some of the most successful tanks ever built. Vehicles like the M4 Sherman helped win World War II. The M1 Abrams became one of the most powerful main battle tanks in the world. But not every American tank program was a success. In fact, some of them became famous for the exact opposite reason. They were too complex, too expensive, poorly designed, or simply ahead of their time. Some never entered service, others entered service, and quickly proved to be serious mistakes. Today we're looking at some of the worst tanks the United States ever built. M3 Lee. The M3 Lee was one of the strangest tanks ever used by the United States. When America entered World War II in 1941, the U.S. Army urgently needed a tank capable of carrying a powerful 75mm gun. However, engineers had not yet developed a turret large enough to mount it. The solution was unusual. Instead of placing the gun in the turret, designers installed the 75mm cannon directly in the hull. A smaller turret on top carried a 37mm gun. This gave the tank two main weapons, but it also created serious problems. The hull gun had limited movement, meaning the entire tank had to turn to aim. The M3 was also extremely tall, making it easy for enemy gunners to spot. Although it served in North Africa and the Pacific, the M3 Lee was quickly replaced by the far better M4 Sherman. M551 Sheridan. The M551 Sheridan was designed as a lightweight airborne tank during the Cold War. The goal was to create a vehicle light enough to be transported by aircraft and even dropped by parachute. To achieve this, the Sheridan used an aluminum hull instead of traditional steel armor. But its most unusual feature was the main weapon, a massive 152mm gun capable of firing both conventional shells and guided missiles. In theory, this gave the tank incredible firepower. In practice, the system was unreliable and complicated. The missile guidance system often malfunctioned, and the gun's heavy recoil caused mechanical problems. The Sheridan did see combat in Vietnam, but its missile system was rarely used. Despite its many flaws, the tank remained in service until the 1990s. M60A2 Starship. The M60A2, nicknamed the Starship, was one of the most technologically ambitious tanks ever used by the U.S. Army. Introduced in the early 1970s, it was designed to fight Soviet armor at long distances using guided missiles. Like the Sheridan, the M60A2 used a 152mm gun launcher capable of firing the Shillelagh anti-tank missile. However, the system proved extremely unreliable. The turret was filled with complex electronics that frequently broke down. Maintenance crews struggled to keep the tanks operational, and crews often complained about poor reliability. The conventional ammunition was also inaccurate compared to standard tank guns. Because of these problems, the M60A2 served only a short time before being removed from service in the early 1980s. MBT-70. The MBT-70 was one of the most ambitious tank projects ever attempted. Developed jointly by the United States and West Germany during the 1960s, the tank was intended to be the most advanced armored vehicle in the world. It featured high-drop pneumatic suspension, advanced targeting systems, and a powerful 152mm gun launcher. The crew layout was also unusual. All crew members sat in the turret, including the driver. But the project quickly became extremely expensive and technically complicated. The United States and Germany disagreed on design decisions, causing delays and rising costs. By 1971, the program had become too expensive to continue. After spending billions of dollars, the MBT-70 was canceled before entering production. T-95. The T-95 was an experimental American tank developed during the 1950s. It was intended to replace the M48 Patton and introduce several new technologies. One of its most important features was a smoothbore cannon, which engineers believed could offer improved armor penetration. The tank also experimented with advanced fire control systems and new armor concepts. However, the design quickly proved too complicated. Many of the technologies were not yet mature, and reliability problems became common during testing. At the same time, the simpler M60 tank was already entering production. Because it offered a more practical solution, the U.S. Army decided to cancel the T-95 program before it reached production. T-28 Super Heavy Tank. The T-28 Super Heavy Tank was one of the heaviest tanks ever built by the United States. It was designed near the end of World War II to break through heavily fortified German defensive lines. To survive enemy fire, the T-28 was given extremely thick armor, with some sections reaching over 300 millimeters. The tank weighed nearly 95 tons. Because of this weight, it had no turret. Its 105mm gun was mounted directly in the hull. The vehicle also used 4 tracks instead of 2 to distribute its massive weight. However, the tank was extremely slow and difficult to transport. By the time the prototypes were finished, World War II had already ended. With no need for such a specialized vehicle, the project was canceled. Chrysler TV-8. The Chrysler TV-8 was one of the strangest tank concepts ever proposed. Developed in the 1950s, the tank featured a unique design where nearly everything was placed inside a massive turret. The crew, engine, ammunition, and weapons were all located inside the turret itself. The turret then sat on top of a small tracked chassis. The design was intended to provide protection against nuclear weapons and possibly even use nuclear power. Another unusual feature was that the vehicle was designed to float, allowing it to travel across water. Despite the creativity behind the concept, the TV-8 never moved beyond the proposal stage. The design was simply too complex and impractical to build. M1 Heavy Tank. The M1 was America's attempt to build a heavy tank capable of fighting Soviet heavy armor. Developed during the early Cold War, the tank carried a powerful 120mm gun. While the gun was effective, the tank itself had several serious problems. It was extremely heavy and mechanically unreliable. The engine struggled to move the massive vehicle, and maintenance requirements were very high. Early models also had poor range and required frequent refueling. Because of these issues, the M1 saw only limited service with the U.S. Army. It remained longer in service with the U.S. Marine Corps before eventually being replaced by more modern tanks. M7 Medium Tank. The M7 medium tank was intended to replace the early M3 tanks during World War II. However, during development, the vehicle became significantly heavier than originally planned. As its weight increased, it no longer fit the role of a light tank, but was still weaker than existing medium tanks. This created a design that didn't fit well into any category. By the time the prototype was completed, the much more capable M4 Sherman was already in full production. Because the Sherman was better in almost every way, the U.S. Army decided to cancel the M7 program before mass production began. T-92 Light Tank. The T-92 was an experimental light tank developed in the 1950s. It was designed to replace the aging M41 Walker Bulldog. The tank featured a low profile and an advanced turret design that mounted a 76mm gun. However, by the late 1950s, military thinking about armored warfare began to change. New Soviet tanks with amphibious capabilities raised concerns that American light tanks might need similar abilities. Because the T-92 could not easily be modified for amphibious operations, the U.S. Army canceled the program. Instead, the Army later adopted the M551 Sheridan. T-69. Tank the T-69 was an experimental medium tank developed during the 1950s. It tested the idea of an oscillating turret similar to those used on some French tanks. This turret design allowed the tank to use an automatic loading system. The T-69 was armed with a 90mm gun and could fire relatively quickly thanks to its autoloader. However, the oscillating turret created ceiling problems. It was difficult to properly protect the crew from nuclear, biological, and chemical threats. Because of these issues, the design was never adopted for production. T-57 Heavy Tank. The T-57 was an experimental heavy tank project developed in the 1950s. It was designed to carry a powerful 120mm gun with an automatic loading system. The tank used a large oscillating turret similar to the T-69 concept. While the autoloader worked well in testing, the design created several technical problems. The turret was extremely heavy and complex. Maintenance would likely have been difficult in combat conditions. Before the tank could enter production, the U.S. Army decided to move away from heavy tanks entirely. The project was eventually canceled. T-58 Heavy Tank. The T-58 was another experimental heavy tank developed during the 1950s. It was armed with a massive 155mm gun and used an auto-loading system to handle the large ammunition. The tank was based on the chassis of the M1 heavy tank. Although the firepower was impressive, the tank would have been extremely heavy and slow. The ammunition was also very large, limiting the number of rounds the tank could carry. As military doctrine shifted away from heavy tanks, the T-58 project was canceled before it reached production. M50 Ontos. The M50 Ontos was a very unusual armored vehicle used by the United States Marine Corps. Instead of a traditional tank gun, it carried 6 106mm recoilless rifles. The vehicle was designed to destroy enemy tanks using these powerful weapons. However, the system had limitations. The guns had to be reloaded manually outside the vehicle, exposing the crew to enemy fire. The vehicle also had relatively thin armor. Despite these weaknesses, the Ontos proved surprisingly effective in Vietnam when used for infantry support. Still, its unusual design prevented it from becoming a long-term solution. M114 Armored Reconnaissance Vehicle. The M114 was designed as a reconnaissance vehicle during the 1960s. It was intended to replace the M113 in scouting roles. However, the vehicle quickly proved to be underpowered and poorly suited for combat conditions. Its engine struggled to move the vehicle effectively, especially in rough terrain. The thin armor also offered little protection against mines and small arms. During the Vietnam War, crews often preferred the older M113 instead. Because of these issues, the M114 was eventually withdrawn from service. Not every tank program becomes a success. Throughout history, the United States experimented with dozens of armored vehicles that never quite worked as intended. Some were rushed into development, others were too complicated, and a few were simply ideas that looked better on paper than on the battlefield. But even these failures played an important role. Many of the lessons learned from these projects helped engineers design better and more reliable tanks in the future, including vehicles like the M1 Abrams, one of the most capable tanks ever built. Sometimes, the worst machines in history still help create the best ones.